It is the Final Word Cricket Podcast. Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon. It's the second episode of the 19th season. We are running towards the men's Ashes starting in about 5 weeks from now. Our series is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. Women's World Cup. Mentioned the Ashes already. We will about 400 times in the space of the next 75 minutes. Will he, won't he? That's the Pat Cummins question. Has Marnus locked away his Ashes spot? We've got the CAXI back. You better believe it. We've got Harry Brook having a chat. We've got David Warner having a chat in response to that. You know how these things tend to go at this time of the Ashes cycle. There is Test cricket being played in Pakistan. There is Test cricket being played in Delhi. The Indian men's team are in Australia at the moment ahead of a limited over series. And the Kookaburra, at long last, is gone from county cricket. Hello, Jeff in Lisbon.
Oh, that was quite an introduction. There's a fair bit going on. There's also a lot of Women's World Cup stuff. I'm actually, to give you the glimpse behind the curtain, I'm watching a game right now, which is between New Zealand and Sri Lanka, which is next to my screen that I'm looking at you on. So I'm just keeping an eye on things. But the daily episode for that game will probably have already come out before this weekly episode goes out. So this is some time travel stuff here. At the moment, Chamariata Patu's 40-odd not out. But you will already have known what happened in that game by the time you hear this. I don't. That's what time travel is all about. Hello.
Beautiful. Well summed up. And by the way, I should mention more often that you can get the ad-free feed if you become one of our patrons, a member, a proud, passionate and paid-up member of The Final Word at patreon.com/The Final Word, link in the show notes. You get lots of various things.
Lots of various.
Lots of various.
Many variations. Many variations, like a good spinner.
That's it. But I can guarantee that you can access the ad-free feed. Women's World Cup. Why don't we start there? We've been doing that with Lacuna Sports, which has been a really great thing, telling the story of their excellent, enterprising brand. But speaking of excellent and enterprising, that chase from Australia on Sunday, I was hauled up in my sick bed for the 15th time this year. I managed to get crook, but I was sort of in a sweaty fever dream of sorts through the second half of that game. But I couldn't avoid the thought, or the conclusion rather, that it's got to be one of the great World Cup chases, doesn't it? Accepting
Certainly
that it's
the biggest.
Yeah, but the biggest doesn't always mean the best. This just felt so significant that it was India that who are now maybe one loss away from being booted out of the tournament. If they lose to England on Sunday, that could be it for them. I know mathematically they might remain in the top 4, but still losing to Australia from where they were, having made 330, the extraordinary individual performance from Elisa Healy. It started inside the power play with Litchfield, but away she went, making 140 plus, way better than run a ball. The guts of Perry to come back after doing a hammy. I'm not sure how serious the hamstring strain was, but
I think it might have been a more a cramps thing in the end, muscle cramp, where she was worried about it because she's had the hamstring problems. Right. But so she went off and did a bunch of physio and got warmed up. But yeah, to interrupt your innings and then come back in with the side wobbling, a couple of wickets have fallen, and you've got to go out there and ice the chase. That takes some doing.
And a number of them play a role in the middle order there. I mean, Gardner and Molyneux, and then Garth. We talk a lot about the batting depth, but the luxury of having Kim Garth walking out at number 9 is insane. And the fact that Alana King was next in at 10, right? It's easy to lean on that and talk about it all the time, but it's been there for all to see in 2 of Australia's wins so far in the tournament. So all going well there. On the other side of the equation, India having now dropped games to South Africa and Australia. Harmanpreet has been captain of that team for a long time. Well, I say a long time. I suppose she was doing the T20 stuff when Mithali was still captaining the one-day team, but long enough. If they don't make it to the final 4, I reckon it might be that she's been an international cricketer for 16 years now, Harmanpreet, and she has a big presence in that dressing room clearly, and has done an awful lot as a player and leader. But I think a lot rides on her getting her team to the semi-finals at a bare minimum.
Well, and she's, you could say that she's had such a grip on that position in large part because of the World Cup semi-final innings in 2017, and got a lot of mileage out of that. But yeah, she, as Firdaus Munda and I spoke about on a daily show at the time, she's someone who at the moment doesn't seem to be helping her teammates as a captain, given her body language, her attitude on the field. Like, there's a lot of negativity coming from her, which can't be helpful. Like, yes, I'm sure she's feeling the strain, but it seems to an observer like she's passing that strain on. So there's a lot riding on what they do in the next few days, that home tournament pressure and all the rest of it.
Yeah, good captains absorb pressure and bad captains reflect it. Or should I say captains under pressure reflect it and amplify it. Like you can see it. Whereas the good skippers, like think about when, I mean, it's an easy example to point to Pat Cummins, right? But when Australia are under the pump, you wouldn't necessarily know it from the Cummins body language and the decision-making process that he goes through. You absolutely know it every time India are remotely under any pressure with Harmanpreet. So that's an interesting subplot through the back end of that tournament. Jeff, a bit of, I wouldn't say housekeeping, just more an announcement, really. We've got our book on shelves in England our launch will be on the 10th of November here. I think it is formally on shelves a couple of days later, but you'll be able to buy it and have it from the 10th, and we'll talk about the launch.
Or earlier, there'll be pre-orders available before
getting to that. So that's the launch date for like physical copies. And Australia, it's the 25th of November. However, I'm not sure when this app will go live, but let's just say as of Thursday, the 16th of October, that will be when the starter's pistol fires for the pre-sale. So you will get, I think we're putting the cover out. It might already be doing the rounds on some websites, but the cover will go live. There'll be social media content, I suppose, that you and I will create, for we are content creators.
Ew,
and I know, sorry to say it.
Don't say that.
By definition, we do that job.
The hill of content is not a hill I want to contribute to.
There will be a link, and you can click it. And if you're in the UK, you can buy the book from one place. And if you're from Australia, you can buy it from another. It should be all very straightforward. And then you can join us.
And if you're somewhere else, we will say, let us find out and get back to you, because that always happens.
That's a work in progress, but there will be ways and means. But just noting that there will be 3 launch things. We don't want to go into too much depth quite yet, but if you're in London, I'd be marking the 13th of November in your diary. I'd be putting a circle around it as something that's final wordy. And there'll also be something on the 10th of November, but that'll be a separate event, but you'll be very welcome to join us. And if you're in Melbourne on the 27th of November, I can definitely say that Jeff and I will be at the Commercial Club in Fitzroy with Paddy. The last lap around the sun for Paddy's Pub. A lot of final word events and drinks have been held there over the years, but
yes,
Paddy's moving on to his new adventures, whatever they end up being.
April next year, the Commercial Club wraps up. Many a tear will be shed, mostly by me, because it's been a fine institution as part of Fitzroy for so many years. But whether it continues as that sort of establishment, I don't know. But at least the greatest publican in the city of Melbourne will be hanging up the apron.
Yeah, final word home ground. It felt appropriate that we would do an event there in the final year. So 27th of November, look, it'll be after work at some point. Just put it in the diary and you'll be able to come along and, you'll get a book, won't you? And we'll probably sign it. And it's a good book, crucially. It's the book you're going to want to buy your friends who love the game over the Christmas period.
It's a book of story time stories, some of the ones we've enjoyed. One of those stories is about the Waikiki method, which is the name that the Duckworth-Lewis method could have had people been a bit more inventive, because that's what the inventors themselves wanted to call it. You can find out how by going and finding that episode and listening to it, or by reading about it in the book. But we got some more information during the week, too late to be included in the book, sadly, but Aditya Sutresna, who's a listener of ours, but who also makes his own cricket pod called Cricket Sickos, did an interview on that podcast with Stephen Stern, who's the one who inherited the care of the method now that Messrs. Duckworth and Lewis have both moved on. And in this interview, Adit tells us that he said the first time that he got in touch with Duckworth and Lewis, so goes the quote, with a paper suggesting a change to the formula. This is Stephen Stern. Frank Duckworth replied saying that he was going on a trip to the Grand Canyon and thanked Stephen for giving him something to read on the plane. So he cracked the first formula on a plane on the way to Waikiki on holiday, and then he got the update to the formula with the Stern edition to make it the DLS method on a flight to the Grand Canyon. How many trips to the USA did Duckworth take? That is the question we have to answer.
Great callback to an excellent Storytime ep, and great chapter in the book as well, at least I think. Beautiful. Thank you, Aditya, for sourcing that and sharing it on our Discord channel during the week. Jeff, we've got a lot to get into. Let's do so now. Pat Cummins, is he cooked? Is he not? Now, late last week, Ben Horn, Dan Brettig, usual newshound suspects, were breaking the yarns about Cummins' return to bowling being dramatically delayed, which of course meant that the return to bowling informs when he can return to playing. So the headline story was that he's out of Perth and maybe out of the series, fair enough. And it remains an active concern that could be the case. Then Cummins spoke on Monday at a Foxtel launch and said that he was still weeks away from bowling, but he is running and he's not ruling out Perth entirely. However, more unlikely than likely. So look, I don't think anyone really knows, least of all Pat, what is actually going to happen here. But it's gone from being fingers being crossed about his back being okay for Perth to where might he feature in the series at some stage. That's best case scenario.
Yes, he's got hot spots on scans that are the bits that could turn into a stress fracture if it gets strained. So they've got to wait until that's completely clear, until every scan is coming up at 0% for those problems before they'll risk getting him into the nets. And then once he gets into the nets, he's got to do several weeks of bowling in order to get the rest of the body fit so that he doesn't blow out some other part of the body, do some hamstring injury or calf injury or that kind of thing. So, the general frame was that they wanted him bowling a month before the test. The test starts on the 21st of November. So the logic would tell you that gives him about a week, another week. He's got to be able to bowl within a week if he's going to play in that first test. So probably unlikely at this point, as they say, which means that if everybody else is fit and well, then Scott Boland would play that first test in Perth. I thought it was interesting, Adam, who Andrew McDonald name-checked when he was asked about the depth. So he said, who else have we got? Well, we might have to go to the next tier through the series. And he said, we've got Brendan Doggett, we've got Sean Abbott, we've got Michael Neser, and we've got Jai Richardson should become available during the series. So those are the four that McDonald name-checked. There are a lot of other names that have other speculation around them, but that should give you an indication of a pecking order just about.
Yeah, I would say that they will need at least a fifth quick, even if Cummins plays some role. And that's because I don't think it's realistic that Boland will play all five. Like, remembering it's 5 in 6.5 weeks, and for all of his resilience and all of his determination to play as often as he can, clearly, given he's been, to an extent, starved of opportunities, I don't think it's realistic that he will play all five. No. So there'll be some rest and rotation, and that will have nothing to do with pecking order and everything to do with making sure they don't break someone down.
Yes.
Hazelwood
also
that as well.
Has a tendency to go down early in series.
That's right. So they'll be mindful of Hazelwood getting through the first couple. They were helped along. Was it 2 summers ago when they planned on resting and rotating, and then the big three played all 7 because they won them all inside 4 days? Like, they could get lucky, right? They could have quick finishes. They could, bowl early in test matches. There are other things that could play in the favour of the big quicks. But yeah, it's quite interesting, like, that McDonald would name those names when you've also got a bunch of others, including, say, Bartlett or O'Neill, or Nathan McAndrew picked up a fifer in the One Day Cup over the weekend. And even Henry Thornton, who, hearing in hushed tones now about how quick he is, how he's rapid, had a pretty good winter playing for Australia A.
Jet weapon, burned up the training track. Yeah.
Well, he was
great
instrumental to South Australia doing the double last year as a change bowler, and then played for Aussie A in Darwin and got a forfeit playing in India a couple of weeks ago. So he's now suddenly in the mix as well. It feels to me more like it did. Remember that summer when Matthew Nicholson went from probably being the 20th pick in the country, then roughed up England in a tour game at the WACA and launched himself into a Boxing Day debut.
I do remember it because we've told the story on Storytime before.
Right.
I wonder if like your current crop of bowlers are hanging out for a tour game, like how much a current bowler would give to be able to actually go up against England and England 11 in a tour game and prove their mettle that way.
Well, you're right. But I mean, in the absence of that, it just feels to me you can throw a blanket over everyone who's not in the top 4. Like, we know who the top 4 are, obviously the big 3 plus Boland. But after that, there could be one of 6 or 7 or 8 because they will need that 5th bowler in the rotation because they're not going to get away. Even if Cummins is fit and firing, the probability of them getting away with using only 4, to me, seems improbable because Boland's 36. So, there's a little bit to play out here, but it does make the next couple of rounds of Shield cricket absolutely tantalising on that front. Even just this week ahead with, like Fergus O'Neill will be up against Sam Constas, all of these mini matchups with guys who need to do something major to give themselves the best opportunity. That's why this is the best time of year to follow Shield cricket. We haven't had a situation like this with Aussie Quicks for a while, and until the Cummins situation resolves itself, so it will remain.
Maybe it depends where it's going to be as well. If you needed an extra in Perth, it might be more likely to be Doggett with height and bounce. If you needed one in the pink ball game or at the MCG, it might be more likely to be Fergus O'Neill with home conditions or the ability to swing. That kind of thing might play into it as well.
But, Doggett's missing this week as well, like Doggett's missing a second Shield round with that hammy strain. I don't think it's like Doggett was the World Test Championship backup quick. So I think and obviously Sean Abbott's played that role on myriad series now. So I think they'd like those two. And Michael Neser did it for 5 years and he's done nothing wrong since. So there are obvious candidates. And Jai Richardson, when fully fit, has proven that he's got the class to be a test bowler. There's no doubt about that. The last test match that he played, it was a 5-wicket bag against England in an Ashes test at Adelaide when they lost a couple of bowlers on the morning of the match. So, they won't be fearful as such, but it's more that it's hard to get a real read on who it might be. So, and also one more thing on Boland, I'm mindful that whenever he's not been picked or whenever Hazelwood's been selected ahead of him, really, there's been an absolute uproar in Victoria, in our home state, of like, this is New South Wales bias and all the usual carry on. Well, this is the best possible opportunity he will ever get. This is the prized opportunity that Scott Boland's been after. Starting a series, front and centre, absolutely required to be at his very best. So what a great opportunity for him too, having never had, I suppose he did start in 23, Jeff, but it was a bit different. He was starting and he was always going to be part of a rotation. This time, he's got it all to play for himself in terms of what I'm not saying it'll be the final act of his career at 36, but it'll be, of course, nearer the end of the years to start. This could be a defining 6 weeks for him if he gets it right.
And with bounce, but one of the things with Boland is that lift that he gets from a length. So if he's able to get that in Perth and discomfort some players there, not so much as a bouncer bowler, but as a gloves bowler or a shoulder of the bat kind of bowler, then that's the sort of influence that he might be able to have. Marnus Labuschagne, we speculated about last week. There was a 100 in a one-day game against Tasmania, pretty quick 100 as well, which doesn't hurt, obviously, different formats and so on, but just more, I think more than technical stuff, it's showing that Labuschagne's got his head sorted out when it comes to being able to compile scores. So that's, you'd think he's much more likely than not at this point, which then has its interesting possibilities with the knock-on effects. Would he go into that opener spot, and then do they use Smith at 3 as it's been talked about, or would Cameron Green stay at 3, and then what does that mean for 6? Or if you've got an opener plus Labuschagne at 3, then you've got Smith at 4, then you've got Green at 6, then you don't have Bo Webster in the team. Webster's been missing Shield games with this ankle management, which is more to do with him bowling than batting, but it's a bad time to not be in to not be in those contests at the moment.
Feels like the chat with Smith being open to batting 3 unlocks a number of opportunities for the selectors. So it means that Marnus could conceivably, well, if Smith bats 3 and Labuschagne were to open, and I think that's a reasonable decision for them to make if they go in that direction. I mean, he only opened 2
Why would
test
you mess
matches
with
ago.
it? Why would you mess with Smith having sort of got back into his old ways at 4?
No, I see that too. But I mean, if Smith's open-minded to batting 3 or 4, like if he's at peace with that and they're not just trying to play to Smith's obsessiveness with 4, right? Then Green at 4, which is where they ultimately wanted him the first time we did this 2 summers ago, right? Heads a lock at 5. And then, Webster at 6, you would assume, provided he's fit. But, don't rule out the big boy from WA. I know that, Mitch Marsh hasn't been out of the test team for that long. And when they handed out their national contracts back in May, George Bailey made a direct reference to how good Marsh statistically is against super fast bowling and how well he did against England when he was confronted with Mark Wood at Leeds in 2023. So, and he's been in glittering nick in white ball cricket. I know I touched on this briefly last week, but that's the sort of thing that I could see happening as well. If they're looking for an experienced batting lineup in an Ashes series where there'll be so much focus, Marsh certainly ticks that box. But yeah, Webster's ankle, so he'll miss that Shield game that begins on Wednesday, where they're hosting WA at Bellerive, and then Marnus gets another crack at Shield level. He'll be playing against South Australia at Adelaide Oval, not at Karen Rolton. It's actually at Adelaide Oval, and the Vics have got New South Wales at the Junno. So huge Shield week, enormous implications or ramifications based on how the results play out in all of this. But yeah, I can totally see Khawaja, Labuschagne, Smith, Green, Head, Webster / Marsh. And that feels robust to me in its own way. It doesn't feel, I think for a while here, they've been stumbling around trying to work out what works best. I think for a number of reasons that feels a little bit more, there's a bit more to it, to that six than maybe some other combinations that might be doing the rounds with, say, a Constas here or a McSweeney there or a Bolter here or there. That feels like a group of players who've, they may not have all delivered in sync. They may not have made thousands of runs together, but have all in their own way got claims.
It's a possibility. England will have a lot of options. We've got the Lions squad that we didn't mention last week, but they're coming out under Andrew Flintoff. So they've got 7 fast bowlers in that extra group. They've got Rayan Ahmed as the spinner in case Will Jacks gets belted, I guess, as that spin option. Given that Rayan Ahmed scored so many runs in the last season as well, is effectively an all-round option. The interesting bit with Jordan Cox, who's sort of the batting and wicket-keeping cover, but also is going to bugger off and play the T20 League in Abu Dhabi after I think the first game of the Lions squad. So that seems like an odd one that they'd be happy to send him off there. I suppose he can get a direct flight back if they need him, but it's a little weird.
Yeah, I think Cox is providing cover for a few different roles there. He does a variety of things as a cricketer, which is a good thing to have. He's been a bit unlucky with injury striking at tricky times for him when Test selection's been in the offing. Yeah, Rayan Ahmed was unlucky not to be in the Ashes squad, had a tremendous season with the bat for Leicestershire. So he'll be near enough, if he's good enough, to leapfrog others. And yeah, that group of quicks, Sonny Baker, thrilled to see they're sticking with him and staying the course after having some troubles in his white ball debuts. Josh Hull, who they clearly like. Matt Fisher, who bowled himself into that squad with a tremendous performance at the end of the county season. Tom Laws, who's looked great for Surrey for a couple of years when fit. So yeah, they're but there's some rogue names as well. Tom Roo's getting a go. Under 19s captain, but Saif Saib, who made 700s this season, doesn't get a Guernsey. George Hill, who I think uniformly would be seen as the best all-rounder in the country in Division 1 this year, averaged 50 with the bat and 18 with the ball or something silly. He can't make the Lions squad either. And what's the go with Sam Cook? Sam Cook missed out on the senior squad and not in the A squad either. I mean, I suppose if there was an injury, they've got so many. If they wanted a Sam Cook style bowler, they could fly him out at a moment's notice. But given he was their England Lions attack leader when they were in Australia as recently as earlier this year, that seems a little bit odd to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the official line was along the lines of, "Oh, we already know what he can do," but you can say that about any cricketer, really, who's not a 19-year-old specky.
They said it about Glenn Maxwell and that A tour back in all those years ago, which ended up scuppering his chance to play Test cricket again.
Yep, and that's the thing. I think it's a dangerous approach in some ways because it's a wriggle out of the question sort of answer generally when it comes to selection stuff. Now they're playing a few fixtures, the Lions, so they'll play against the senior England team, they'll play against the PM's 11, they'll play against Australia A, but most importantly and most excitingly for us, CAXI's back. All right, the Cricket Australia 11 will be taking on the England Lions. And the only question on our lips is Will Bosisto going to be picked? If not, why is Will Bosisto not being picked? You think Adam's annoyed about Sam Cook being left out of the Lions squad. If Will Bosisto's not in the CAXI squad, if he's not leading it, if he's not captaining it as a spiritual leader of the CAXI, we will revolt. We will overturn the barricades. We will storm the building. We will set it alight. It's got to happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen. The CAXI's back and you're going to be in trouble. Hey, la de la. The CAXI's back. Yeah, let's, I mean, we had a chance to go back and look at some grade scores that he made last year,
Mm-hmm.
where he was dominating back in Perth. They start their grade cricket this weekend, I think it is, in WA. Does anyone know him? Can we get him on the show? Who's friends? Can we run a media campaign to get Will Bosisto back captaining the CAXI as he should be, his rightful position, and use that to ultimately get him an unexpected test berth in 25-26.
Yes.
Is this where it begins?
This is where
100
begins.
against Archer and Wood for the CAXI.
Mm-hmm.
No, that won't work because they're playing against the Lions. But you know what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
That could be the England state performance, as it were, that we were referring to at the start of the show. Believe in Bosisto. Believe in Will Bosisto.
The fairy tale of the summer starts here. If you thought the Curtis Patterson comeback was unlikely, wait until you find out about the Will Bosisto comeback. And we've been having all of the other, amongst the speculation of the 38 players who are going to play in the 11 come the Perth test. We've had all the usual derivative nonsense is now beginning with, this ex-player said this and this ex-player said that. The banter, the hashtag banter season has unfortunately begun.
A hashtag Ashes Bants, to go back to the glory days of Twitter, actually, as it were. I think there's some stuff that Zach Crawley said, which is a bit daft, but some stuff that's quite pertinent. So all the bit about like confusing the moral Ashes thing and somehow trying to suggest that it was, if I'm reading this correctly, and it was a word salad, so it may not have been, but that Australia were citing that following Bairstow Carey or some gibber like that. But like someone tell him that, that wasn't them. It was the other mob, the team he plays for. But the bit about Aussies being wound up by Bazball, like that's true. Like I wrote about this recently for the Wisdom Cricket Monthly magazine, like why Australians are so sort of taken by this narrative. And it does feel different this time. There is truth to that. But as I was writing in that article, like what doesn't compute for Aussies is this kind of saviour complex this England team have got. Like we're going to save Test cricket. Well, to Australians, it doesn't need saving, right? We don't have the same structural issues that exist in Australia around what's happened to cricket as you go back to the ICEC report and the class stuff and the way that it's vanished from government schools over the period of a couple of generations. That's not a thing in Australia. Like the deciding where the spirit of cricket dividing lines were around that Bairstow Carey thing, that jarred, the self-commentary. And I think fundamentally, like Australian fans feel as though this England team just don't deserve as much grandiosity,
as much buzz, but also they're talking about themselves. And fundamentally, the tall poppy Australian thing is don't talk yourself up. And that can be a really negative sort of trait where people who actually achieve worthwhile things get cut down just for doing it. But it has its positive side as well in terms of reining in rampant ego. And there's been a lot of being self-referential coming out of England, which irritates an Australian sensibility, and all the more when it's the main rival cricket team being the one doing it, and even more when they're doing it and also not winning the big series. It's not like they've had an unprecedented run of success while doing this. They've also had a bunch of drawn series, they've lost series, and they've had moderate results.
Yeah, look, I don't quite see it that way. I think they actually have performed really quite well, and they've won unexpected test matches. And what's that stat about Stokes having the best record ever for an England men's captain?
Like, but they haven't won series.
No, but I mean, well, they have won series, but they haven't. I mean, you can isolate
most of them. They haven't. They drew with Australia. They drew with England. They lost in Pakistan.
No, but they've won plenty of series along the way. You're doing that thing where we just benchmark against Big Three, right? But they have won series plural. It's just that I think the major fear, if you want to strip it all the way back, the major bit about all of this is the fear that it might actually work. Australian fans don't want this to work in Australia.
No.
But it might.
No. Yeah.
So there's that element as well. And I don't come to this from a parochial Australian fandom perspective, far from it. Like, if anything, I'm criticised for being the very opposite of that. But I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there that Australians don't quite get it, and that's understandable. And English players, fans, etc., don't get why Australians are so worked up about it. And it's all going to come beautifully crashing to a head on the 21st of November. So it does mean that the next 5 or 6 weeks will be insufferable. I mean, the usual suspects were weighing in yesterday. Warner knew exactly what he was doing because he just can't help himself. And that'll be the first of a million of those. And I suppose, Jeff, to a certain extent, we have to take our responsibility for the moral ashes stuff, because it was a very fun thing for about 3 weeks in 2023, and we leaned into it as heavily as anybody did. And then it sort of, I don't know, it's been ticking over in different ways ever since, and now got completely out of hand, and here we are. It's still doing the rounds.
It's a Weyland-Yutani kind of xenomorph thing. Like you've got the alien in containment. You think that it's safe, but eventually it will escape. It will overrun the ship, and then possibly eventually the entire planet.
Yep.
This is the risk, and this one got out of containment, and away it's gone. But we just have to take some deep breaths and throw ourselves into it for the next couple of months, because that's the way it's going to be. Let's go to a break. Before you get there, Maurice Blackburn, the number one plaintiff law firm in Australia, our good friends and supporters on the show. Adam, they've been with us for a long period of time, and we've got a lot more stories to tell over the summer.
Yeah, we do. The stories of their lawyers who have been instrumental in resolving a number of superannuation insurance cases with insurers, like, for instance, Craig, who assisted a client who was diagnosed with MS, and her condition deteriorated and was unable to work in her normal job. But when trying to claim her TPD benefit and income protection benefits, the insurer pushed back and alleged that because she'd attended her GP with symptoms before taking out the policy, that they were entitled to cancel the policy, which is just... Anyway, I think just saying that alone makes the point. But nevertheless, it took a lot of work with Maurice Blackburn working with the client, taking on the insurer, and they eventually agreed to withdraw those allegations and pay her a lump sum benefit of over $300,000. And she's also now entitled to monthly income protection benefits. So this is, again, where Maurice Blackburn, working on behalf of hardworking Australians, Australia's number one plaintiff law firm. We're going to be telling their story in different ways through the course of this Ashes summer. Mentioned before, they're our principal partner on season 19 of the show, which we're absolutely chuffed with. So, most of their work, a lot of their work, is on a no-win, no-fee basis, and all of it is geared towards helping hardworking Australians get the legal outcomes that they deserve.
We will be back with you in just a sec. It's the final word. Season 19, episode 2. As we move on from all of the Australia-England stuff that's bubbling away. Another story that was going around during the week, Adam, this was a curious one, is that an unnamed one of the IPL consortia, which wasn't specified, had been on a fishing expedition and had pitched up to Pat Cummins and Travis Head and said, how about we give you $10 million a year, I assume US, 10 million would be, it's usually the currency, to sign up to one of those year-round deals where you'd play for whatever other interest this franchise has, be it in the UAE League or the US League or the South African League, or if they're buying into the 100, I'm not sure which operation it was, but which they turned down. The idea was to lure them away from their Australian national contracts. This seemed very much like a fishing expedition to me. Like, I don't think that there was any expectation that they would actually accept this deal. I think this was like floating something first to see, to at least make the first approach, so that if there's a future approach, it'll be for a lot more money. And because there's no way, like a $10 million deal kind of isn't enough. If you're Pat Cummins, you're probably making, I don't know, $4 million or something from Cricket Australia through your central stuff. You've got your IPL contract, might be another 2 or 3 million on top of that, and then you've got endorsements and all the rest of it. So it wouldn't be sufficiently more to turn your head, probably. But more to the point than tempting the player, I reckon this might be to do with, or this story getting out might be to do with certain interests around Cricket Australia wanting to bolster the case for privatisation in the Big Bash, because that was certainly the accompanying line with this was, well, this is evidence that we're going to have to move on privatising Big Bash teams sooner rather than later, because we need to get this capital in there, because there's so much big money flying around that they will get players. It felt like a setup, I think, that this story found itself into the public domain.
Right. I wouldn't quite go that far with it, but I do definitely agree with your reading of it being something of a fishing expedition, because this isn't really about Pat Cummins. I think he's on 3 mil centrally, 3.7 for the IPL. Like, it's a moot point, the 10 with him. And it's probably a moot point with Travis Head as well. I don't know how much money he earns from the IPL, but you'd expect a fair chunk on top of his lucrative Australian deal. And the probability is that Travis Head will be Australia's next captain, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not really about them. It's a price signal to the market. It's indicating to the wider cricketing world, maybe to the generation that are following this lot, these types of deals will be there for you. They will be in the offing. And it only takes one. Yeah, it only takes one person to unexpectedly take one of these deals who's playing for Australia, and they will hope that the floodgates open, right? That this will change, because we often speculate that these deals will ultimately replace national contracts. It's not doomsaying when we posit that, by the way, like that there is a flip from national contracts and NOCs and then releasing players for T20 duty, and that being turned around to more a football model, which you hear occasionally described to where players would be primarily owned by their club, and in cricket terms, that means their IPL franchise essentially, and the threads that follow from it, and would occasionally be released for international duty in certain windows, right? At the moment, we're not there, but if there was momentum and a number of players went in that direction, it wouldn't take long for the balance to flip in, like, say, a generation or so, maybe 5 or 10 years it might take to turn the whole thing on its head. So it's a little bit like the Saudi money, right? There's no Saudi money washing through cricket yet, but once that first dollar is in it, once that first league goes with Saudi Arabia, and it'll happen inevitably, then it'll be the moment where it all starts to change. So yeah, I didn't really see it as much as a realistic. It's almost ambit having a crack at Cummins and Head, who are two very high-profile senior Australians, when it's not really about them. It's about probably someone who's 23 right now who has played a few times for Australia, and when they're 25 and has played a few more times for Australia, might be an amazing get on one of these deals.
It's showing that you can make the offer, but if it's going to make one of those players a couple of million more, that's probably not enough to pull them away from where they are. But if the next offer is 30 million instead of 10, well, that would be a more difficult decision to make, I think. The interesting part with all of this, I reckon, is that, and I've talked about this kind of dynamic before, the reason that someone like Pat Cummins or Travis Head is attractive to the franchise is because of what they've done in international cricket primarily. They want Travis Head because he won the World Cup final in India and made 100. They want Pat Cummins because of what, yes, they've played IPL and they've had successful IPLs, but it's also because of their reputation, their standing, their marketability, because of being international players. So really, to be someone who's worth throwing a whole lot of money at, you need them to have already had a substantial international career. So the franchise cricket still needs international cricket to exist for that credibility and that standing. If they're throwing that money at the 23-year-old or the 25-year-old who doesn't have that behind them, then they're not going to be worth that money. So there's a kind of paradoxical cycle there that in order to be worth it, you need to have not focused on franchise cricket. If you're someone who's all in on franchise cricket, then you don't have that same kind of clout to be able to command that kind of cash.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we said about Quinton de Kock a couple of weeks ago, right? Like Quinton de Kock's been away from the national setup for a couple of years or thereabouts. I know he played the T20 World Cup last year, but generally speaking, he's been
18 months.
18 months. He's been away for a time anyway. And who really knows what Quinton de Kock's been doing since, right? But that's what they'll be hoping for. They'll be hoping for more of a sea change where, and this is the assumption that underpins all of this, that if you provide people with enough IPL or IPL adjacent content, that they'll just move in that direction because they love the game enough. I'm not convinced of that. Far from it. I don't think that there's anything to suggest that people in Australia or England, to use the two examples of the markets we're talking about here, would zombie-like walk straight into those leagues and replace their national allegiance with an allegiance for the way they have a football team over here. We're talking about decades longer, century longer. In the case of Australia, a national team that existed before federation, right? Those bonds and those links aren't going to vanish because players are taking huge cash. It's going to be incredibly messy when the time does come, and I think it will.
But I think another part that isn't considered is what the value is post a playing career to having been a substantial international player rather than to having hived off during that career to go and play franchise cricket, where the amount of money that a player stands to make through all of the other things that they can do in their life, whether they're ending up in commentary or coaching or speaking circuits or all the rest of it, like it's so much easier to command a much bigger paycheck if you're someone who's played 50 tests or 100 tests than if you're someone who played 10 and then got tempted off to the circuit, right? You're not going to have the same standing. So
Yeah.
there is a financial incentive that's less clear, but is compelling, and there's a credibility and a social acceptance piece to it as well. That would you rather be Mike Hussey, who's almost universally loved and considered to be a legend, or would you rather curtail that career at 20% of what it actually was and then go and make a bunch more money in the short term, but you don't get to be that person in the sort of fabric of Australian sport and have the rewards that come with that in the much longer term?
Yeah, completely agree. India in Australia, I think they're arriving tomorrow, actually. A few of the players coming straight from that West Indies Test series. So there's 8 limited overs internationals, 3 one-dayers, 5 T20s. That begins in Perth on Sunday, then to Adelaide and Sydney. Then the T20s are in Canberra, Melbourne, which is a sellout, Hobart, Gold Coast. Gee, playing at Carrara. How about that? Like Scasey's there. And the Gabba to finish. Adam Zampa's missing the first one. He's on just in case paternity leave at the moment, because getting from Byron to Perth ain't easy, but he'll be hopefully they have the safe arrival of their second baby, and he'll be able to slot in seamlessly in the usual way. They've sold 700,000 tickets for this summer in Australia already, which is a mighty number. That's before a ball's been bowled. That's by the 14th of October. So that's inflated by these big crowds they'll get for the India games, which is great, and then an Ashes summer. But still, it's going to mean that they have a staggering number of people through the gates this summer. So, and we'll be at all of it in terms of daily shows. We will do dailies for this Australia-India series. We've got Bharat in position, ready to go and steer the ship. Jeff, you'll chip in, I'll chip in. We'll make it work as we do in the usual way. But it all begins this week on the 19th, which is Sunday, and that will be in Perth.
I mean, it's crazy to consider an MCG sellout. Like that's wild to me for a white ball international in October. It's not. It doesn't have. It's not the storied. It's not the time honored. It is a big contest, but just the timing of it indicates how much of a modest appetizer it is, and yet that's where the attention is, and the interest in the fact that those aging former Test stars will still be there. Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli are coming out to play in those 50 over games. They've left the 20 over stuff as the work of younger men, but they'll be there. And I suppose if you've got, you'll have Mitchell Starc playing the ODIs, right? And I'll be interested to see what they do with Hazelwood in terms of how many of those games they want him to play. But that contest coming up against one another, and if you could have Kohli peeling off one more 100 on Australian soil, it'd be quite the day.
Yeah, Kohli, Rohit will be the subtext of every game, won't it? How do those two fare?
Mm-hmm.
As now,
if they made runs, that's the story. If they didn't make runs, that's the story.
Exactly. Now, in their advancing years, both having retired from the other formats, right? So this will be there's a scarcity element to the Kohli Rohit story, I think, which helps make this series what it'll be, brief as it is in the one days and the T20s when the younger blokes take over. Mentioned that India have been playing Test cricket. They finished their second match yesterday, defeating the West Indies by 7 wickets at Delhi. They made a massive 518 for 5 declared in their first innings. That was 175 for Jaiswal, a century for Shubman Gill. He's now made 500s as captain in 7 matches or something absurd. So his record as a leader.
Jaiswal doesn't make small hundreds every time he makes one. It's 160 sort of.
Yeah, he's a formidable force, Yashasvi Jaiswal. And then they bowled out the Windies for 248. Kuldeep Yadav picking up a 5 for 8 for the match. How about this? 68 wickets in 15 tests for Kuldeep, average of 21.7, but a strike rate of 37, which is the 4th best in Test history. Boland and Atkinson are 2nd and 3rd, I should add. So Lohman's always the pack leader with 34. Yeah. But it used to be JJ Ferris as number 2 forever.
Staines the long career mark, because he's about 42, I think, 42, 43.
That's it. So Marco Janssens. So yes, it is fair to say that there are a number of bowlers in modern cricket who've got crazy strike rates. But yeah, Kuldeep's sitting in fourth spot ever, which for a spinner is all the more remarkable, given that typically,
and
always
a spinner who never gets to play is
strike rates.
Like how many the number of times they found a reason to not pick him.
Yeah, and he's the most prolific left arm wrist spinner ever in terms of wickets taken. So it's a really interesting story for South African cricket that he's been able to, Indian cricket even, that he's been able to do as he's done in that discipline. But he's debuted, Durham Sharla. I was doing that test, March 2017. That's nearly it's over 8 years ago. That's going at a rate of worse than 2 tests a year.
Yeah.
So hopefully now with Ashwin gone, that frees up some space for him. He's only 30. I was staggered that
Ranganahara took 400 wickets after the age of 30. So,
true.
So he might still have a few in him.
I was staggered they enforced the follow on here, Jeff, because they bowled for 81 overs and popped the Windies back in again. And the Windies did far better the second time. I thought it was queued up with a first innings lead of millions. I thought, well, this is queued up beautifully for some junk time puns.
And with Bumrah in the team, who they're supposedly trying to look after, and he bowls 18 overs in the third innings of the match, having enforced the follow on. It was Bradman Areas. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was expecting there to be, someone else go make a few more hundreds, but West Indies made some hundreds.
Gill twin tons or Jaiswal twin tons would have been irresistible to have gone again. But the Windies, to their credit, 390 second time around to force India to bat that second time. How about John Campbell? His record as a test opener is
it's not good.
It's Alec Bannerman areas, really, let's be honest. But he got there in his 25th test match at the age of 32. He's finally got a test century, which is going to take some doing against that Indian bowling lineup, even if they were bowling for the second time consecutively at that moment. Bumrah 3 for 44, but still, you got to make
Shea Hope got 100 as well in that second innings. And, I know there's a bit of straw clutching here with West Indies, but it is something, even just making them bat again was something, making them actually have to chase a relatively substantial 100-plus target. Like, that counts. You've got to take that as a win, not in the match, but it's something you can take away from it.
Yeah, I agree. It's not nothing that they and look, it sounds like we're being patronising, but those comments from Brian Lara during the week, they're utterly despairing. And he's not the only one, of course, but that sense of dread. And in Lara's case, questioning how much they want it. And that's an enduring query, I suppose, of this generation, how much they want Test cricket versus other formats and all the rest of it. But the guys churning out in this team clearly want it. They want to be there. So, it's far from a foundation of anything, but it could have been a darn sight worse having conceded 500 plus for 5 declared in the first innings of the match. Jeff,
Pakistan, South Africa, I've been keeping an eye on this actually while we've been chatting, and goodness me, it's gone in fast forward. Like when we started recording, Pakistan was still batting and trying to set a lead. They've been bowled out. They've set a target of 277, and South Africa have already lost 2 wickets. So, Noman Ali, who else would it be? But Noman Ali and Sajid Khan, who took 9 of the 10 wickets to fall in the first South African innings of the match, they've started off with a full head of steam here. So Noman Ali's got Markram and Vian Mulder out, the great number 3. Mulder out for a duck, Markram out for 3. So they're in a bit of strife here, but they've got 277 to get. Ryan Rickleton and Tony Dazorzi doing the batting. They made all the runs in South Africa's first innings. I've rarely been more surprised to open a scorecard as when I saw that Tony Dazorzi had turned up in the first innings of this Pakistan game, because I've watched a bit of Tony bat and I wasn't entirely sure that he had that in him.
Yeah, love that Noman Ali's got, 8 of the 12 wickets to fall so far bowling for Pakistan. I had a look at his record before. He's now taken 91 test wickets at 24 when you account for what he's done in this match. He's 20, speaking before about spinners who've done a lot with limited opportunities. 39 years of age as well. He well and truly qualifies as an old spinner. Long may continue at this level.
He's very much in the Zulfikar Barber mold, popped up from nowhere and then started dominating. Yeah. Every land is no man's land.
And likewise, Simon Harmer, having had a say in this test match, having done such an extraordinary amount of good here in England over such a long time, getting that belated chance at Test cricket in that complex web around Kolpaks and Kolpak ending. And, we all know that story. Speaking of England, maybe we should finish in England here, Jeff. A couple of bits to touch on. One is that the Kookaburra ball which has been used in, up to 4 rounds a season. It was 4 rounds this year in the championship. Looks like it's going to be dispensed with. So the story here is that Rob Key, who was an advocate for using the Kookaburra ball, his logic was that the harder you make it to take wickets in England, the better for developing players. But the consequence was enormous scores. Alex Stewart called it the worst decision ever made, or something like that in county cricket as the Supremo at Surrey. Well, he's not the director of cricket anymore, but you know what I mean. His position at Surrey is very clear and very senior. It sounds like, from reporting from our very own Will McPherson, who ran a 90-minute half marathon on Sunday, by the way. Well done, Will. Is that the counties have been given the chance to scrap the Kookaburra ball, and scrap it they will. So they'll be back to 14 rounds a season next year with the Dukes as the ball in all cricket. So I know that doesn't sound like a huge deal because, what does it matter, Kookaburra Dukes? But the numbers suggest the competition is radically different when using a Dukes compared to the Kookaburra. And it has been across the 3 seasons they've been trialling it. So that will be a factor next season. And Jeff, just a quirky one to finish, actually. MCC, who, used to play so many first-class games. And I was reading last night in Pat Rogers' book about an MCC fixture from 1912 and how prestigious these games were seen to be when playing a game against MCC. Well, it's been since 2020 since they played one until this weekend. They played a 3-day game against Zimbabwe A on MCC's tour there that's been taking place over the last week. It was drawn, but a high-scoring competitive game by the looks of things. And there's about, in all those games of all those years, it's been 5.5 seasons since they've had a chance to play a first-class fixture, and I quite like it. I like the idea of there being teams that still have first-class status. I know with MCC it's an antiquated, historical, probably better than antiquated, reason for having it. But, one of the lovely things about cricket is the quirks that have been built up by convention over time, and one of them is that there's a provision for teams who aren't states and counties to play in games like this. So it's a darn sight more credible than that. We've gone through them before, haven't we? The smokers versus non-smokers, etc., which is more a story time thing. But anyway, so that game did take place and on a tour that continues with some T20s the next couple of days.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. If the MCC versus Zimbabwe A in a 3-day game gets first-class status, World Series cricket should get first-class.
Well, it does. I've thought about this a little bit recently about what could, what could and couldn't be established. It's probably a conversation for story time, I realise. But I do think there's room for conversations around this. Like, why do we, and not just about World Series cricket, but why do we get so stuck in our ways about what has and hasn't been declared first-class status? And indeed, if you want to stretch it out, there are some test matches that deserve consideration one way or the other. Ultimately it's just statistical categories, right? I know that the quirkiest of them all. So an example of this is which I'm quite keen on, and I'm going to try and advance the case next year, 30th anniversary, where Dean Jones for a World 11 against Australia at the MCG made that 100 famously, right? Which was it was seen as a one-day international at the time. Richie Benaud described it as such when Jones got to 100, but it didn't have that status. Yet the Tsunami game, which was held at the MCG 8 years later, did. The game that was held at Lord's between the West Indies and I don't remember what the opposition team was anymore. It might have been a Global All-Stars team as well, a T20 to raise money for the Hurricane rebuild. That got T20I status. There were games in the 90s and 2000s that you've done on Storytime, Jeff, where continents played. Like there was an Asia team and Africa team.
Africa 11s, yep.
Which is fine, I guess, if you squinted it. But then why wouldn't we recalibrate or reconsider at least whether a World 11 playing against Australia in a game that they all thought was a one-day international at the time wouldn't be rethought of in those terms? Now, who does it hurt? Like, what damage is there if we've got these other games there? And we're never going to strip those of one-day status. We're never going to strip the World 11 game that Murali, I know I keep citing Murali here, but you know what I mean? Like the 8 wickets that Murali took in it, which enabled him to vault to 800, that'll never get stripped to status.
Yeah.
Why
There's
should
more
we be
consequence
sheepish
for taking status away from a game like for
exactly.
detracting from a player's record, because ultimately the reason, the argument against it is basically practicality, that you don't want to have to recalibrate the stats. You've got all of these printed stats from previous wisdoms of players' career records and things like that. But we live in a digital world where you can update those things, where it can you can show your workings. You can say this player's tally was considered to be this until this year when it was updated because this game's status changed. So you don't want to take runs and hundreds and appearances and wickets away from players, and that's understandable, but it doesn't mean you couldn't add a few here and there.
Yeah, and I think that, like, isn't it that quirk that the last game that George Bailey played at international level was wicket keeping in a World 11? I mean, it's an imperfect thing. It's an imperfect thing. So, I'm going to try next year, 30 years on, to push for the game at the G from March 96. I think that was more a one-day international than a number of those that we listed there before. And there's another game there where Michael Bevan made that 180.
Yes, the World 11 versus
that's another one.
Asia.
The Asia 11.
Yes.
Yeah, it was an Asia 11 in 1997. Now again, it's 99, wasn't it? It's ridiculous that didn't somehow get one-day status in all of that. So there's some loose ends to tie up, and maybe World Series cricket in that round can be considered as well. Jeff, I don't know why we ended on that, but we did. I do know is that we're going to be busy boys over the next, 3 months? It's going to be an enormous season 19 on the show. If you want to pal up with us, Adam at finalwordcricket.com, there are great opportunities to be a commercial partner of the Final Word. And why wouldn't you want to be at a time where we're going to be doing, probably in all probability, no, not even that, I'll declare it, we will certainly register our biggest download numbers ever. So get on board for that if you can, or patreon.com/the Final Word to become a member and to back us in doing what we do across not only busy seasons like this, but, around the year. Around the cycle, we're here on the Final Word. Anything to add, Jeff?
I think that's it. Let us go onward bravely into a new week of cricket, whereupon there will be another Women's World Cup Daily coming up right behind this episode, and plenty more to come until the final on the 3rd of November.
All right, we'll catch you next week.
Bye-bye.